Hello, good evening, welcome. Nice to see everyone for our final speaker series evening and the end of your last day of school. So, round of applause for everyone. You made it almost, unless you have those finals and papers and things. If so, good luck to you. We would like to acknowledge the land on which the University at Buffalo operates, which is the territory of the Seneca Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations Confederacy. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty of Peace and Friendship, a pledge to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. It is also covered by the 1794 Treaty of Canandaigua between the United States government and the Six Nations Confederacy, which further affirmed Haudenosaunee land rights and sovereignty in the state of New York. Today, this region is still the home to the Haudenosaunee people, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and share ideas in this territory. This evening, we're very lucky to have our very own colleague, Julia Lillie, here with us. She's an art historian, and she will be introduced by our colleague in a nearby department, Anna Wager, who is curator of exhibitions at ubART galleries. So please join me in welcoming Anna to the stage.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Julia Lillie for tonight's Artist Speaker Series. Dr. Lillie is a historian who studies the print culture and social history of early modern Europe, specializing in 16th century prints, illustrated books, and maps made in Northern Europe, and on the ways that these highly mobile objects created and disseminated knowledge in an increasingly connected world. Her work also investigates the formation of social networks in the collaborative environments of print shops, the migration of Netherlandish artists, and the scholarly ambitions of early modern printmakers. She holds a BA from the University of St. Andrews and an MA and PhD from the Bard Graduate Center. She's been a recipient of fellowship and research support from the Herzog-Ernst-Stipendium, Gotha Research Library, RSA-Samuel H. Kress Research Fellowship in Renaissance Art, the Newberry Library Center for Renaissance Studies, and Herzog-August Bibliothek, Wolfenbüttel. She has a professional background in museums and galleries, previously serving as the collections manager in the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So Julia and I have some shared interests. We both have researched and written about historical printmaking and the migration of knowledge that printmaking engenders, early modern in her case and 19th century in my case. We both worked in larger museums at various points in our careers, and the subject areas that we maybe knew the most about originally are not the areas we often teach or curate. This is a common thing for art historians, particularly those of us who work in galleries. Out of necessity and out of interest, we're often constantly teaching ourselves about different areas, movements, and artists. Dr. Lillie often brings her classes to ubART galleries, usually to talk about artists that are either totally contemporary, or in the most recent instance, artists that are the backbone of American mid-century art making, which is a highly abstracted and non-narrative style of work. What strikes me about watching Julia teach is that she's incredibly prepared and knowledgeful, particularly as someone whose main research area is not mid-century painting, for example, and that she has a skillful ability to invite student participation. As an observer in my own space, I can always tell when students are comfortable around a professor, which indicates a level of mutual respect. And at least from my perspective, I see this profoundly demonstrated in Julia's classes. I'm looking forward to learning more about her career and her art historical interests tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Julia Lillie.
Wow, thank you, Anna, for that really lovely introduction. Very personal, thank you. So yes, some of you know me, some of you don't. Hello, I teach here. My first slide is just a plug for my classes. I usually teach Introduction to Modern Art, as Anna just discussed, and History of Graphic Design. I should be teaching both of those courses next fall. Keep them on your radar. And next semester, I just want to tell you about my two courses. So in the spring, I'm teaching AHI 111. This is a 100 level class called World Civilizations Through Art and Material Culture. And it's really a history of materials and processes of art making. Its focuses on the period pre-1500. Still space in this class. And also in the spring, I will be teaching AHI 470, Global Modernisms. This course pluralizes, expands our understandings of modern art and its boundaries, supposed boundaries. In all my classes, I like to use, visit the UB galleries and the rare and special collections to enliven our discussions. So I hope I'll see you in these classes. Tonight, I'm going to talk about my career path and about other possible paths one can take for working in fields related to art that don't mean being an artist, right? I'm an art historian, so I'm doing something else. And I'm doing this with all of you in mind, right? As art majors, as art history majors and minors. I certainly didn't know about all of the ways that one could find meaningful work with an interest in art. And hopefully this will give you a few ideas. I'm happy to talk more about anything you hear tonight in Q&A. After I give some work history, I will share some of my research that has come out of my PhD dissertation. And I've been working on developing a couple of different aspects of it into articles. And the goal is to publish these articles in academic journals. So I'll be discussing my process throughout, and towards the second half, I'll sort of transition into a more formal art history talk. And the topic will be Renaissance guidebooks and theories of travel. I'm starting off, however, with a photograph of my mother. This is Jill, and standing there is my sister, Georgia, who's about 8. I'm in the stroller and probably 2. This was taken in 1988, I think somewhere on First Avenue in Manhattan, maybe around 6th Street. My mom is here in a leather bomber coat, and you can tell that she's incredibly cool. My classes from this semester know that my mother passed away in September, exactly 3 months ago. And that's been really difficult. In her 20s, she was a printmaker and painter. And she later transitioned to a career in psychology after having children. But she is a big reason why I study art history, why I'm here, why I'm passionate about what I'm telling you about tonight. So shout out to my mom. Awesome lady. Okay, my next image is a photograph that I grabbed from Google Street View of a pair of buildings. These are on East 3rd Street between 1st and 2nd Avenues in Manhattan. I grew up in the street level floor apartment of the building on the left. So this level right here. These are 2 Greek Revival row houses that were built in the late 1830s. My parents moved in the late 1970s when the neighborhood was not very desirable and when New York City was selling off a lot of buildings at low prices. A co-op formed to purchase the building from the city. My parents later were very lucky to be able to join the co-op, and it was really, really cheap for them at the time. It was a railroad apartment, so in one long procession, there's a living room, a study, a kitchen, and a bedroom and a bathroom. My parents very creatively turned this into a home for 5 people. They built lofted bedrooms, they divided spaces, very impressive. And I'm starting here with this image because this is where I first had the experience of putting myself in the shoes of someone who lived in the past. We lived on that above street level floor, and the original plaster molding had survived, so creating the border of the ceiling in the front room. So buildings from this period, the parlor room was kind of the nicest room. It would have had the most decorative elements, and those were intact. So I would lay on the floor in that first room and just look up at the ceiling and imagine who lived here. What did they think about? What did they wear? What did they eat? What was their commute? Where did they go? Who did they see? Who designed these things? Who made them? Where did they get the materials? I started to do this thing, an imaginative, creative exercise that actually is the study of history. Thinking about history as imaginative is a concept that's really stayed true for me. So I would look around at other buildings in my neighborhood. A couple of blocks away, there's the Merchants House Museum on 4th Street, which was built at a similar period from my building. The difference is that one family lived continuously in this house for almost 100 years, so that the interiors were really, a lot of the interiors were kept, or the furnishings were there. It's been converted to a museum. I also, a little bit further south in the Lower East Side, would go to the Tenement Museum. This is two different tenement buildings that have very well preserved apartments where immigrant families from the 19th century lived, and the objects and spaces really tell the stories of these families. So I had early experiences of thinking about history also through domestic spaces, through objects, through real people, real spaces. Museums were an escape for me from the noise of the city, the chaos, the constraint of an apartment and my siblings. They're often, have large spaces, are nice and cool in the summer, relatively quiet. These were places where I could further this interest in looking closely at objects, thinking about them. So I would visit the Metropolitan Museum as a kid. It was free. This is the Great Hall, which was completed in 1902. And I mentioned this here to point out just the psychological aspects that lead us on our paths, right? What kind of spaces do you respond to? What types of sensory experiences do you respond to? I'll skip ahead to college. In college, I double majored in art history and modern history. I also had several internships during college. So one was in a university gallery at the upper left at a different university. And one was at an art nonprofit in New York City called International Print Center, New York. Those were both summer internships. Most universities have galleries or museums like ours does, right? So lots of opportunities here. I also interned through the New York City Parks Department and the Historic House Trust with a architectural restoration team. And we worked on the grouting for the stone base of this mansion in Harlem, the Morris Jamel Mansion. This was a time when most internships were unpaid. I'm seeing that changing for the better. So to offset, these part-time unpaid opportunities, I worked in all kinds of jobs, in cafes, restaurants, etc., right, to balance that out. Also in college, I worked in a furniture restoration shop. People would bring in their 19th century wood furniture. It was my job to prep them for being refinished. So I would be sanding down layers of old varnish, waxing them, getting them ready. And I really loved this up close work with objects. It's kind of meditative. The line between boring and meditative is there, right? But in my nostalgic view now, it was meditative. Oh, how nice it would be to have enough time to just sand a dresser. After college, I took 4 years of working in various different jobs. I really wanted to try things out and see what I liked. So I lived at home at first, later with friends. Some of these jobs included an entry-level fundraising job position at Cooper Union, the art school in New York. If you ever see the word development, development means cold calling people and asking for money. And that's what I did for this college that, I guess until kind of recently supplied or provided free tuition for their undergrads. I also worked in the gift shop for a museum, the Neue Galerie on the Upper East Side, right across from the Met. It specializes in turn of the century Austrian and German art. They have a, cutesy design shop. I worked in the shop for a little while. So other things that I did, right, that are not in these beautiful spaces, catering, cafes, restaurants. I worked in a food truck. So not all of these jobs are directly related to art, right? And even the others, they're adjacent. They're related in some way. But the museum gift shop got me into a space where everyone was passionate about art, incredibly passionate. And more importantly, I just got the chance to observe, to see what people do in museums. What are those jobs? Who looks like they're enjoying their job? Who doesn't look like they're enjoying, who's complaining at the coffee place, So I think there's a lot of emphasis on like, what are you going to do? What are you going to gain from it? And sometimes just being in a space and watching is really useful. So I watched development people, the curators, the art handlers, the visitor services team, people in the bookstore. They were very happy. People in collections care. And I also took an evening course in printmaking just to kind of keep up with my own interest in making. Okay, so I do all these things. In 2010, I got hired as an exhibitions coordinator at International Print Center, the place I had previously interned. So obviously, one of my points here is that internships can sometimes lead to jobs, right? Full-time paying, real paying jobs. And despite the ambitious name of this place, there was a staff of 3 people, including me. There was a director and me and another person who, we kind of did all the work, right? I organized juried shows. We did 4 juried shows every year of contemporary printmaking. I organized installations, organized the openings, corresponded with artists, processed all the loan paperwork, just a million emails. I also designed all the print publicity for the shows. So I learned a lot on the job. I wore a lot of hats. I really recommend a small organization where you can do a lot and just get exposed to a lot of different responsibilities. Especially for artists, work in an art organization, it gives you kind of a view into how decisions are made about exhibiting, what that whole process is like, right? It gives you a little bit of the other side. So this was intense, but I realized that I really liked working on exhibitions, and I liked the social aspect. We had student groups coming. I liked leading the student visits, interacting with visitors, with artists, and being in a space of learning and discussion, right? I spent 2 years there, and then I got really burned out with all the logistical stuff. And I wanted more time to think deeply about art, about objects, about history, design, material culture. Oh, sorry. And I'm putting this up here. This is a screen grab from the current webpage for that organization. They've renamed themselves Print Center New York, much better name. And this is their current show, Data Consciousness, Reframing Blackness in Contemporary Print. It's up until December 20th. So if you're in New York, it looks great. I encourage you to go. So I applied to graduate school. I ended up at the Bard Graduate Center. This is a very interdisciplinary program. It has an MA and PhD program focused on decorative arts, design history, and material culture. While, to choose a program, I did a lot of research. I recommend that. I researched schools online. I went to open houses. I talked to current students, really got a sense of the real deal. And I looked at the funding structures for different programs. So this program for me was funded, 2/3 of the tuition was paid for by the school. So it was a huge factor, right, in going there. During grad school, the classes that I enjoyed most were actually in modern design and in Renaissance history. So I was always grappling, like, which one am I going to go with? As a blend of the two, for my master's thesis, I wrote about the cult of Albrecht Dürer in World War I German propaganda posters. So if you're an indecisive person, choose a revival topic. You get to do both. You get to think about two different periods, right? And how the history of one is leveraged in the other. So here you can see, this is a poster from 1915 for German war bonds that is drawing on the imagery from the history of Renaissance German printmaking, specifically Dürer, as a tool for rallying nationalistic pride and support for the First World War. I was required to do internships in grad school. This is another key point, like look for a program that's going to really get you out there into the world and support you there. So, folks at my school helped me with applications for internships and figuring out what was a good fit. So I did one at the New York Historical Society. So I really was still interested in 19th century New York, keeping that going a little bit. And there I got to look through their collection of prints and drawings related to New York City. They obviously have like a huge collection of that type of material. A lot of what I looked at was 19th century color lithographs by major printing houses like this one, Courier and Ives. They were pretty affordable prints, depicted various aspects of city life, including bird's eye views of Manhattan. I did another internship at the New York Public Library in their print collection. It's not very known, but they have an incredible and very large collection of prints and artist books. They actively collect artist books. In that internship, I got a crash course in early 20th century American printmaking. I was given boxes of etchings to catalog. And so I would sit with a box. I'd start at the top at the first print. I went through all of their works by this artist, John Taylor Arms. He's part of the etching revival. Americans, Europeans who are interested in bringing back interest in the art of etching. So I would sit with the artwork. I would look for the date, the medium, try to figure out what type of print media is being employed here. I would measure it with a handy little measuring tape, measure the plate mark, measure the paper, look on the back, note any inscriptions, the artist signature, the edition, anything else, any notes, personal notes, and I would write a short description of the piece. And all of this would get published and pushed onto their online database for NYPO. For some of these works, and this goes for many museums, they had very minimal index cards from like the 1950s with a couple different points about a work of art, but it was not really accessible to anybody who wasn't physically there to look at that catalog. So my work was involved in broadening the access to the collection. Through both of these internships, I formulated personal connections with the people that I worked with, who are my supervisors. These people wrote me recommendations for later jobs, for going back to school. So they were just incredibly helpful. The internships also gave me more opportunities for slow looking. Having the opportunity to be one-on-one with an object, and an almost secretive experience. There's nothing else really going on. I really valued that. And again, I watched what the curators did, what the professional or what the research specialists did, finding out what are the jobs here in a library, for example. What do you need to do for that? I decided I wanted to be able to go deeper with research in a particular period, and I wanted to be able to choose the topic rather than be handed a box, right? So I applied to do my PhD back at my grad school where I'd done my master's. I didn't get in the first round, so always reapply, always reapply. I applied for a bunch of different jobs. I was hired at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the collections management team in the Department of Drawings and Prints. And I got this job because I had done print cataloging previously in these internships. So for 2 years, I worked at the Met in collections management. What is collections management? You don't hear about it that often. It's not as like glossy as being a curator, but it's actually a great job and you don't need a PhD. You get to help take care of the collection. That means physically care for it, for looking after its storage, in creating public access to the records for those works, facilitating in-person research of works, transporting them around the museum. It's a very hands-on job, and it also involves getting to know the works of art personally. It's not as technically demanding as something like art conservation, but I think it's a great line of work. So collections management can look very different based on the collection, based on the types of objects, the type of institution, the size of the institution. In my case, I led the project for cataloging and photographing the collection of drawings and prints, and they have a massive collection. There are 1.2 million objects in the drawings and prints department. This is more objects than any, sorry, I have to get this right. This is more objects than all other curatorial departments in this museum put together, right? There are 19 curatorial departments, including Asian art, African art, Greek and Roman art, Islamic art, etc. So this department, drawings and prints, with very easily stored, flat works of art, has more than all the other departments put together. Cataloging this entire collection, that's ongoing. It's probably going to take another 70 years until they have it all online. There's a lot of stuff that we would look at things that hadn't been opened up in decades. And again, I really love this detective work. In this role, I was working on planning and strategy for the cataloging project. So kind of making the pitch to the museum director at one point for we need more people to catalog this so we can get these records out. So it's not going to be beyond my lifetime that we're done. All kinds of things regarding that. I want to show you a few pictures of like after hours in the Met, which are just really fun from my time there when I get to wander around after visitors. And here I was continuing my education and looking. As kind of a side note, this is something that I don't think AI should do for you. AI tools have been used or attempted to be used to attribute works of art, like to try to identify who made such and such piece. And I think that just takes all the fun out of it. It's not about only identifying the artist, right? It's about creating a personal visual reference in your mind, something that's unique to you. It's about creating the sense for yourself of a time period, of an artist, of their work. It's about delighting. It's about fixing details in your mind. I can still recall little details from prints that I looked at during my time at the museum. I love this horse with its mane of snakes, sort of Medusa-like head. I love the market stall that's selling fantastical creatures / decorative elements in some made-up world where the shingles all have faces. I was arrested by this unfinished print, a first date of 6, of a print by Hendrik Holtzius, probably the best-known Dutch printmaker, pre-1800 anyway, engraving in dry point. And I saw actually that the AKG has another print from this first date. So you could go call the AKG and go see it. So all of these works are from what we call the Renaissance period, or somewhere between 1500 and 1800. And the Met collection is really strong in that area. So it drew me in. If I wasn't decided before, I was trying to like go halvesies with modern design. Now I was kind of being pushed more and, well, not pushed. I was being wooed by Renaissance prints. Just another shot of like somebody's got to change the light bulbs in the Met. They have to wait until everybody leaves and go on this insane lift to do that in the Spanish court. And on the right, that's my level of access for the Met Gala. We were told to stay home on the day of the Met Gala, so I got the day off. It was fine. Okay. So grad school part 2. Then I go back. I had this recurring experience of wanting more, wanting to go deeper with every step. You take a step and see what it's like, right? And take another step. So I was facilitating research, but I wanted to be able to do the research myself. I saw that all the curators had PhDs, and that was probably necessary for this particular field. However, as I said before, it's not necessary for all museum jobs. I could have continued in collections care, or some other areas would have been being a registrar. So tracking works of art in and out of the museum, processing loan paperwork, or in digital media, visitor experience, education, really fun one. There are all types of ways that one can engage with museum work that don't require a doctoral degree. But I decided I loved research and I wanted to have the PhD experience regardless of whether it was going to mean going back into museums or not. Like, I'm here teaching, and I just knew I wanted to be in a space of learning and be able to pursue research and have this social sort of discursive experience. Another option I like to recommend is information and library sciences degree. That's a master's degree that can be applied to various roles in archives and libraries. These are not all fusty places. There are wonderful objects to be learned from, to be seen in these places. And I think that's like a really cool way to do it without having to do a PhD. Other nonprofits, university museums, libraries, there are many organizations, small and large, in and around Buffalo. I encourage you to check out. Okay, so by the time I was doing my PhD, I was 8 years out from undergrad. And it took another 8 years to fully complete the PhD. So I defended in early 2023, then submitted edits, and finally I get to walk in the graduation in 24. So it is a long road, and you have to be up for valuing the journey for sure. And I reminded myself of that all the time. During the time that I wrote my dissertation, COVID-19 epidemic happened. That was hard for everybody. I also had 2 children in this period. For anyone thinking they may eventually want to have children, it slows down work on something like a dissertation significantly. It's just a reality. So I might have done things different. I might have done like my PhD a little bit earlier if I could have rewritten history. So what does the PhD look like? I took courses, I took written and oral field exams in 3 distinct fields of study. And I wrote a dissertation, an original piece of research that is a book-length study, and the goal is that it will be published as a book or a series of articles. I developed a topic with my advisor. I was interested in the effects of the Protestant Reformation. If you've been in my survey class or history of graphic design, you might have seen some of these images before. On the left, Albrecht Dürer's rhinoceros, famously a print made without having seen a rhinoceros, as you could maybe tell the longer you look at it. On the right, a print that's rich with Protestant rhetoric by Lucas Cranach the Elder, an allegory of law and grace. So I was interested in the Protestant Reformation. I was interested in the ways that prints conveyed knowledge, in quotes, okay? So contingent knowledge, information that's highly impression-based sometimes. I was interested in this idea of the contingency of knowledge. And in the 15th and 16th centuries, with the printing press enabling the spread of many, many, many printed objects and texts, I just thought that this was such a fascinating period. But I needed a topic that was viable, something that had some sources out there that I could use, but had space for me to say something new, that maybe had primary sources that had not been given attention before. And so I thought about what I could contribute. I looked into a topic on female printmakers and publishers. I'd still like to do some more work on this area. But there are sometimes practical limitations, like the people that I was really interested in were Dutch, and I had some German reading knowledge, I had some Italian reading knowledge. I could not conceive of learning Dutch. So I just didn't do that one. These are some of the ways that we make decisions, right? Some just practical reasons. But Volksken Dierik's fascinating print publisher. This is a portrait of her by her brother-in-law. So in the end, I researched a group of printmakers active in the late 16th century, so 1580s, 90s, into the 17th century, from the Netherlands. Most of them trained in Antwerp, at that time it was the southern Netherlands, who were Protestants. So Lutherans, Calvinists, Reform Protestants. This is about 50 years or so after Martin Luther is nailing the theses on the church door, right? So after the Reformation. The fallout of that history. This group of artists coming from the Netherlands were fleeing religious persecution at the hands of the Spanish Habsburg regime, which was Catholic. And this group moved to a German city called Cologne. So a lot of them were based in Antwerp initially. They got kicked out of Antwerp for being Protestants. They went to Cologne. It was kind of the next, well, I look into in my work, like, why did they go there? There are many reasons, but it had a university, it had a flourishing print publishing industry already. It didn't have any major engravers that were very skilled, so there was a void. I conducted social history research in archives, and I combined that with visual analysis of works of art. I found that this group of Protestant artists collaborated with local publishers in Cologne. So the folks who owned the printing presses, who paid for a book or print run to be made. That they collaborated with these publishers who were usually Catholic, and that they were able to relaunch their careers in this new place. However, only for a short period of time, about 20 years, before the Cologne City Council decides, we don't really want you guys either, and forces them out. So I had a nice discrete time period to look at. And I looked at a wide variety of prints that this group made. What do you do if you're kind of in the religious minority and you're trying to make your career? Oh, here's just an image of the types of archival documents that I waded through, learning about the social history of this group, how they were arrested, surveilled, lists of unbaptized children that made you suspicious of maybe being Protestant. So a lot of it was kind of looking at social history and then into the works of art. So this group made works that were quite critical of the Catholic Church. I'm going to run through a bunch of them here. I'm not going to go too deep into them at the moment, but this is, a piece that's creating negative depictions of the Pope and of cardinals. This one, it's very clear, right? An aide who's holding a spear that says Testimonia Scripturae, like representing like the true scripture, is lifting up the Pope's cloak, and underneath he's seeing that he's actually this grotesque beast, that he's hiding that. This print was not published or not printed in Cologne. The artist was based in Cologne and he was sending his plates elsewhere. He would have gotten in trouble for this kind of thing. This is a portrait of a Protestant heroine, somebody who had fought, who had led the defense of a Dutch town from a siege of Catholic forces. There are also very secular topics. These are two works that are referencing humanism, sort of the classical past. On the left, a representation of the virtue of humility. On the right, the Libyan Sibyl, a series from a series of sibyls, sort of mythological female priestesses almost, along with hand-engraved poetry beneath. They also made work that was looking particularly to the current events of the time, to the persecution of Protestants. This is the sack of Antwerp from 1576. It's a sort of journalistic in tone. I think you see a lot of different styles and tones in these works. This one is a very early depiction of like a city being sieged. This is before the 30 Years' War and the advent of like daily newspapers. And here we see the Catholic troops coming in and ravaging Antwerp and its citizens. They also made satirical works, kind of more everyday, cheap engravings. This one is poking fun at the two young people that are wearing these like ruffled collars. It's drawing attention to the vanity of their dress, and that their collars have just gotten too big and too ostentatious. And it's all the text and imagery is making fun of that. And this is a doctor who's going to be cutting. Here's another couple of works that refer to this idea of the fool, this capped male figure who is playfully disrupting this woman as she looks in the mirror, and again drawing attention to the vice of vanity and of her oversized collar. So I loved all these depictions of dress. I spent a lot of time at the New York Public Library looking through albums where people had collected prints, cut them out and pasted them, mostly 17th century, so a little bit later. And it was interesting to see how, you know, these objects were not always so precious, and also how they were collected. Meant, you know, multiple copies of the same print put together. Sometimes they're organized by theme, by artist. This is a totally an additional, you know, research thread of how are these works collected later on? How are they arranged and conceptualized? So it's hard not to get too pulled into all these other tangents as you go along in a research project. And I got really interested in geographical imagery. It formed a chapter of my dissertation, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that piece today. This, for example, is a small printed book by the artist Matthias Quad. It's called Die Jahr Bloem. It's like the blooming year from 1595. And in rhyming verse, he writes about all the things that have happened that year. And he includes this very small little engraving along with the letterpress of the three continents that were kind of the accepted continents, known continents in medieval European understanding. So Europe, Asia, and Africa. So I saw that this one artist, Matthias Quad, made a ton of texts, atlases, illustrated guidebooks, that he was attempting to craft an identity for himself as a scholar artisan. This is an idea that he's really taking from Dürer, from, you know, the idea that you're going to be writing a text, that you're going to be thinking about science, that you're going to be presenting yourself as a really learned person. I actually think some of this legacy continues today in contemporary art, where there's some expectation that you're going to be a philosopher, sociologist, really cerebral person, in addition to being a maker, an artist. These works are also have to do with organizing what the artist felt would be containers of universal knowledge. And this is a really common impulse at this time that speaks to European colonial projects to control and subjugate. Along the way in my research, I really loved seeing the mistakes, printers' mistakes. So these are images from quads, atlases that have, I think, ghost prints actually of texts obscuring the images. And just speaks to, you know, the difficulty in the printing process, how not all of these books are perfect. Okay, I'm going to talk for the rest of the time on my current research and move into kind of more formal. How am I doing for time?
7 point.
And when did I start? Who knows? Okay. Okay. My project investigates the effects of the expulsion of Protestant religious groups from the Netherlands upon art production in the German city of Cologne. Its focus is on an influx of Protestant engravers and publishers who established themselves in Cologne in the 1580s and formed a community in exile. I examine how printmakers and their families were able to successfully fill a void in Cologne, where there were few established engravers of note. They impacted the print culture of 16th century Cologne by bringing a Protestant perspective to texts and imagery, by establishing the city as a center of map production within Europe, by embracing the themes of a broadly secular humanism, and by raising the level of engraving skill. Their presence spurred local Catholic publishers to collaborate with them on a variety of print formats, to form an ecumenical network of printmakers, publishers, poets, writers for a short period of time before Catholic retrenchment in the city. Indeed, undergirding this study is the argument that certain print shops served as hubs for a network of people interested in secular topics such as geography, history, current events, and classical learning. This is a drawing with pen and wash depicting the trading area in Cologne. It's on the Rhine River, so the money in this town is made through trade. Print projects in these areas join together actors from different religious backgrounds outside the conservative religious culture of the city's more powerful institutions, such as the city council, the university, and the Catholic Church. And here's the Cologne Dome, the cathedral that was built over many decades and stands today, kind of dominates the city. On the right is a bird's eye view of the city of Cologne from around 1570. As I show through my explorations of the print shops of Franz Hogenberg, Johann Bussemacher, Peter Overath, and others, the frequency and apparent ease with which the Catholics and Protestants collaborated on books and prints contrasted greatly with the relationship between the city officials and Protestant immigrants, as evidenced by restrictive policies, surveillance, and arrests. Incoming Protestant engravers brought their expertise in rendering subjects drawn from classical mythology, literature, and history, as well as maps and city views that evinced a humanist-driven focus on local history through first or second-hand observations. Their attention to current and historic events linked these printmakers to an intellectual culture that placed value, or new value, I should say, on empiricism, first-hand observation. They appeared to extend this idea to world geography by copying earlier maps of the Americas and by studying written travel accounts by Europeans. In examining their work, it becomes evident that they encountered a group of like-minded people in Cologne who shared their scholarly interests while holding on to more mainstream religious identities. My study unearths ways that Renaissance printmaking was uniquely positioned to build social connections during a time of religious fracture. The focus of the rest of this talk is on the guidebooks, atlases, and maps made by one artist in this group, Matthias Quad, who collaborated with a Catholic publisher named Johannes Bussemacher. Great names in the study. Yeah. Quad's books were innovative because they were practical. They were small. That meant they were affordable and portable. He used, for the most part, German language text instead of Latin, which meant that more people could read it. And he introduced the use of small engraved maps to illustrate his guidebooks. He's responsible for the first atlas to include original text in German rather than recycled text from previous accounts. And in that, he's using some of his own travel experience throughout Europe. So his work really showcased attempts to reach larger audiences for geographic material than many previous European makers had. I'd like to discuss a few different theories of travel and mapping that appear in Quad's work and that of his peers. The first is a Protestant-inspired theory that travel and mapping can be pursued as a way to reveal what they feel is God's creative work. Philip Melanchthon, a close collaborator of Martin Luther's, established a school of geography and mapmaking organized around this idea with an explicitly Protestant point of view in mapping. So here is a slide from the Itinerarium Orbis Christiani, basically an itinerary of the Christian world, an atlas of the Christian world, and the Christian world as defined by Europe. So there's a political point of view there too. So, you may know that I'll leave that there. In Luther's work, he wanted to translate the Bible into German, wanted to provide greater access to scripture. So Melanchthon applied this idea to mapping, to laying out plainly in print the Christian world, mapping, sometimes also mapping the locations of places mentioned in the Bible, making this information visually plain for people to access, making it tangible. So there's always this eye towards greater audiences or broader audiences that Quad is building off of. And here you can see that it's a really, really detailed map. This is showing the Low Countries or the Netherlands. The little dotted lines are giving precise routes that one can travel on, connecting various cities and towns. And you can see, the intense labor that's put into engraving these words. This is one of Quad's specialties. So he worked on these prints. He was pretty much, he was a mediocre printmaker in terms of figural imagery, landscape imagery, but he really nailed it with hand lettering. And, remember, these are all hand carved into copper plates. Backwards, thank you. I love this one just because the root has to go outside the boundaries of the print. Okay, so that's one. Another theory, or maybe simply just a motivation for travel and mapping that I see in Quad's work, is the rediscovery of antiquity. And this is the whole project of the Renaissance, right? A rebirth, a rediscovery of learned culture in some way. So the idea is that one should travel to unearth antique wonders and to uphold that history within the bounds of Europe. Beyond this, travel through and mapping the German lands was conceptualized as a tool in the project to argue for the classical roots of the German nation. That word nation was very much in the discourse starting in the early 16th century. Maximilian I named his empire the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. Nation was there. So there was a political project to claim German tribes, like ancient German tribes, as indigenous to the current lands that were controlled by Maximilian. They looked to the Roman writer Tacitus, who wrote about the mythological figure Tuascan, an earthborn god who, as shown in this print from 1543, was the father of all Germans. That's the title up at the top. And the name Tuascan becomes Teutsch, becomes Deutsch, that becomes the word for German, the German language. So in Quad's descriptions of German towns in his European guidebooks, the first sentence usually of one of his descriptions includes, the Latin name for that town, includes some description of the ruins or remnants of antiquity in that town to kind of make this link. So this is his basis of value. And here you can see up close one of these guidebooks. They're really interesting. He's got a little descriptive text about this town, Regensburg, and then he has tables here with specific towns and the mileage between one town and the next. So 1 mile from Ederhausen to Leber, and then 1 other mile to the next place, right? And then he's including also regional fold-out engraved maps. These are wonderful little puzzles. The last theory of travel and mapping that I want to focus on here is that of travel and empirical observation more broadly as a tool of government. Quad appears to develop this incrementally across his later works. In this piece, Geographische Handbuch, meaning geographic handbook, from 1600, we can see right here on the frontispiece, he's establishing visually the hierarchies that he believes in. He has a clothed figure of Europa sitting at the top of this kind of fantastical architectural frame. Asia is on the left, Africa is on the right, and America is meant to represent kind of everything else. All of the Americas that are being kind of slowly learned about in Europe at this time. So there's America. And he's creating this hierarchy, obviously visually in the placement of these figures, also in their level of dress. You see Europa is kind of the most clothed. America is the least. And actually, when I was looking at this frontispiece, I noticed that someone had gone in and added pubic hair to America that wasn't there previously. So they were upset about that. So Quad here is heavily influenced by, the imagery of his time. He's influenced by Spanish drawings, Spanish maps, obviously one of the more active colonial powers. Here I just want to show you that his books were a lot smaller than many of the more expensive versions of world atlases at the time. So you can see here just visually his would have been a lot cheaper than this large folio edition on the left of a Latin printed atlas. Okay, so Quad sought a wide range of readership, and he frequently addressed the topic of audience in the text for this world atlas. It's really nice to study an artist that has written a lot. He writes, "The reading of geographical books is not only a diversion, but also an entirely useful exercise." He says the book is intended for, quote, "whatever rank you are," meaning any social rank. He says it's of interest to, quote, "those who don't travel, have good chambers," meaning they live in a nice place, in a nice house, and, quote, "stay home and dry." But who, nevertheless, quote, "rightly inquire where and how far this and that land lie," and the like. It's tempting to think that some of these casual indoor readers could have been women. He's certainly meaning educated people who travel by reading vicariously, right? A more maybe quotidian use. He also claims the book will allow professionals like merchants and traveling messengers and post riders to find routes, such as, quote, the nearest and easiest detour to their destination in case they encounter danger. I think this is a bit of a stretch because a regional map of Germany maybe wouldn't have helped you out of like a scuffle on the road, but the intended audience is clear. A messenger along a German postal route was a professional role, that it was a highly professionalized role at this point. So I just love this print of a traveling messenger from around 1600. You can see he's holding an envelope that's addressed to someone. He travels in rain or shine. And you can even see the skyline of Cologne, the cathedral being constructed in the background, sort of underneath his right hand. So placing this interchange of information, of texts, of news, reports, partly in Cologne. Quad also states that a third group, students and middling scholars, people who he says may have read histories like Homer's Odyssey and Virgil's Aeneid, will also find practical use in his atlas. They will not just imbibe stories about travel, but understand distances between real places. So this group may be composed of people like himself, an educated craftsman, or like a student at the University of Cologne. The final two-page spread in the Geographische Handbuch provides the most direct visual evidence for Quad's intentions to reach a broad set of readers and to teach them about his chosen subject. It also links to the idea of using geographic knowledge for governing and potentially for a colonial, a use of governing in colonial context. Following the last of his 82 carefully engraved maps is a reference image that explains the vocabulary of maps and atlases. It has no precedent and is an original invention by Quad. Occupying the right half of the engraving is the Vocabularum Geographicorum, a visual glossary of geographical terms. It consists of a template map with various types of land masses and bodies of water, yet it depicts no specific place. So the engraved letters A through N are placed around the map and they correspond to a key that's given below with 13 Latin words used to categorize geographical features along with their German translations. So for example, they include the Latin insula and it's given as the German Insel, meaning island, and so on. In the text on the verso of this print, Quad provides expanded definitions of these words also in German, and he uses real examples to help explain them. On the left half of the page is an image titled Ventorum Index, or Wind Index, which depicts a compass with directional points, and providing the names of the various winds in German. Here's another version of this as a single sheet that was not bound. Yet within these seemingly neutral terms, Quad creates a hierarchy yet again. In the Vocabularum and in the description of Peruvia in his main text, Peruvia meaning the area of, it's now South America that was controlled by the Spanish. He defines all of South America as a peninsula rather than a continuum like the accepted continents in his mind of Europe, Asia, and Africa. A peninsula is, he says, a land where the water runs almost completely, that it has only a narrow piece of land, so that it almost hangs on the continent. Yet in the book's foreword, Quad classifies Peruvia differently. He says voyagers encountered, quote, 2 or 3 large continuum as Peruvium, Americam, and the southern world, or Schweiderwelt. His inconsistency reveals discomfort in fitting the Americas into the categories that he accepts. This map of South America, however, is precise and based on his sources, is accurate in depicting its river systems. It shows some innovation from Quad. He was clearly motivated to communicate an understanding of geography while he's very shaky on the verbal classifications of the place. And here I'm showing you where he's getting some of his information, his geographical sources. He's combining aspects of these two different map sources and putting them into a new one. Quad writes that an application for the vocabularum is not only the current handbook, but also other large and foreign cosmographies that will be easier to understand through it. So while the language used in a world atlas printed in Europe could vary, its maps were likely to contain Latin labels. So this could represent access to the pool of texts and maps in this area of images, geographic images of the New World. Quad is potentially instructing his patron here, the head city councilman for Cologne, Hieronymus Krebs, another great name. He's potentially instructing this patron to improve his vocabulary in order to read maps of the New World, potentially as an idea for him to get involved in colonial extraction. As council member in Cologne, he wasn't really able to commission missions or trips on his own. But there was precedent in Germany for colonial activity. The Welser family, based in Augsburg in southern Germany, was a banking family. They controlled a portion of current-day Venezuela in the north, including Caracas, for about 20 years. They received this as sort of a payment from the Spanish. Go forward again. And Quad again uses sources that are going to be really easy to understand, written in the vernacular, sometimes for non-literate audiences, that are showing this link of political power through geographic imagery. This is a map of Europe in the shape of a queen. He develops the idea a few years later in History of Germany. In this text, he mentions the uses for princes and potentates who may use a history text as a resource in their work. He even argues that princes have a particular need to learn about Germanium, about Germany, without being able to travel extensively due to their responsibilities. He writes, while even the common man and private people can easily travel and can themselves inspect and inquire not only of Germanium, but also other distant countries and kingdoms, it is still the case for great princes and potentates, but especially with the young princes, a different opportunity, as they have to deal with various affairs in their districts. And when they have to talk and act with other rulers, they have to do this through their emissaries. So here he's really saying how rulership can be improved and potentially expanded through knowledge of geography and geographical terms. In my last slide, I want to make a comparison to a really beautifully hand-colored print, just to give you a little color at the end. This is a print from a few years later that's, I think, combining a lot of Quad's ideas into one image. This is an image in a text by Giuseppe Rosaccio. It's Italian. And on the right is the whole image. It's including a world map and various little diagrams below. And one of those diagrams is like Quad's template map. It's not depicting any particular place, but it's giving us various different geographical terms and helping us understand Latin and Italian. So here we see Renaissance cartography very much still bound up to medieval ideas, medieval European ideas. But we also see, through the use of the Medici coat of arms, that the regions of the world were thought about through the goals of European domination. This banking family was financially backing some colonial projects. So I think I just want to end here with this link, this inextricable link between geography, rulership, and European colonial projects. I'll end there. Okay. Thanks for sticking with me.
Questions? Audience? What would you like to know?
Yeah, Laura.
Where are you in your research for this current work? And do you have to go and travel to look at these works in your
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it would have been fun to include more of like the travel photos. So I did get the chance to travel. I did 3 different trips to Germany with fellowships and got to stay there for a couple of months each time. So some of the images that you saw were from like random little towns in Germany that have amazing libraries and print collections. But a lot of them, the advantage of working on prints is many of them are digitized and they're multiples. So there were actually a lot of them in American collections that I could go see in person without having to travel too far. And where I'm at with my current research is developing these 3 ideas of theories of travel that are being conveyed through images, through these texts by this one artist. So yeah, that's what I'm currently working on. Thanks for the question. Other questions? Yeah, Max.
I noticed in fonts the spelling of names was like changing. I was just wondering what that was.
Of artist names?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Can you think of an example?
Or spelling was I think it was a piece of the architecture sitting on top.
Oops.
Yeah. Is he even trying to spell his name and I thought this
Sorry, where are you looking?
I don't know.
Oh, at the bottom it
Inside the engraving at the bottom. That's his water.
Oh, Quaden. Yeah, it's just like further elaboration. He's just making it sound more Latin. He's trying to sound fancy. Yeah. His full name is Matthias Quad von Kinkelbach, since you ask. But yeah, Matthias Quaden, that's just like making it sound more Latin. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah. Other questions? Oh, yeah.
Have you experimented with printmaking yourself?
Yeah, I have. I've never really done engraving. Most university print shops have moved on from engraving, but I would like to do, some of the techniques that these artists did. But I've studied and talked with artists today who use engraving, like Andrew Raftery, who teaches at RISD. He's really committed to the art of engraving. And so I've gotten to see what that actually looks like. But yeah, that's a good question too. And the letterpress process, is very much this, it's almost the same now, setting type. Other questions?
Do you have any ideas about edition size? How many of this versus that?
Yeah.
Is it and are those like the market forces that are driving that? I mean, maybe
Definitely market forces. Yeah, I didn't really talk about market, but Cologne is in a great location for printmakers because it's pretty close to Frankfurt, which has it's seasonal. There's a spring and fall book fair, and books and prints were sold in Frankfurt. So from there, buyers from all over Europe would be coming to stock their bookstores and their print shops. A book like this one would be in the hundreds, not in the thousands, because of the complexity of the project and the length of the project, including 82 engravings. But a single sheet print like this one, could be up to 1,000, somewhere in that range. That's generally like what print scholars think, like 1,000 to 1,500 even. And then of course the plates can be repaired, re-engraved. You often see like subsequent versions of an image. It's not exactly the same as the first run, where they can have a second life. Yeah. Oh, Teju.
So like you were showing like your kind of path to where you are now.
Yeah.
And all the little jobs and little like museums you've been to, are there anything from that affect how you do research now? that you
Oh.
might not have thought about had done them?
Oh, I mean, I'm certainly wanted to emphasize just like the visual bank in my head that some of it I didn't have control over, but it's there because of these experiences, and because of like engaging with what I was shown and what was put in front of me as my task, and just really paying attention to that. Yeah, I think certainly, seeking out mentors in those places, at the Met, and kind of looking at how they can study art and also study social history. That's something I took certainly from the museum experience, that you pick your area, you pick your subject, but you don't have to like say goodbye to everything else that you're interested in. So I think I got to see the way people like maintain different interests throughout their careers in kind of a broad view, which was nice. It was kind of freeing. It's like you're just picking this thing for this project, and you'll be able to maintain other set interest as a smaller article or as an exhibition, or as something else that you contribute to in some way. Yeah. I think of.
Last call, folks. All right. Well, thank you so much.